The PTS for title update 22 is currently live, and with it, it's coming a lot of nerfs and buffs into the game. That's gonna go for gears, for weapons, for talents, for almost everything, and also there is some new stuff that's coming in title update 22. Now, for this video, I want to focus on the assault rifles. I want to go over them because there is some stuff in there, some nerfs and buffs that I did not see on the patch notes. Like, for example, the Eagle Barrel got actually a damage nerf, and the Chameleon got a good damage buff, but none of those I saw in the PTS patch notes. So, with that said, I'm gonna go over all of the assault rifles, show you guys a difference between the current live game, which is title update 21, and the PTS changes that's coming for title update 22, so you guys can have an idea what's going on, and show you guys if these changes go live, by the way, because keep in mind, these are the PTS, these changes might happen or they might not happen. Okay, starting off, the first weapon we're going to talk about is the ACR. Now, the ACR does have two variants, which is the ACR and the ACR-E. Now, they all got a damage nerf, so they went from 59,000 damage per bullet to 58,000 damage per bullet. The RPM still is the same, the max size still the same, and there is some buffs to the reload time and the optimal range. Next weapon in the list is the AKM. Now, keep in mind, the AKM, there is two types of AKMs, and inside of one of those types of AKMs, there is different variants. It sounds a little bit complicated, but basically this one right here that says AKM, this is the only one that has the highest damage per bullet, and actually in the patch notes for the PTS, the damage went down and slight nerf, so it was 67,227 damage per bullet, and went down to 67,000 still 161. So that was a slight nerf to the damage of this weapon. The next type of AKM is this one right here. So this is the black market AKM. As I said, it is a different type of the AKM itself. It has three variants in this type. There is two high-ends and one named version. They also got a damage nerf, so they went from 65,000 damage per bullet to 64,000 damage per bullet. So moving on for the next weapon types, let's talk about the AUG assault rifles. And the AUG assault rifles, there is three variants. There is the high end, there is the invisible hand, which is the named version, and there is the Bighorn, which is the exotic version of the AUG. And they went from 56,000 damage per bullet to 57,000 damage per bullet. And this damage buff went to all of the AUG variants, which means the Bighorn technically got a damage buff, which I did not see in the patch notes. But the AUG itself got the damage buff, and also it got a max size increase. So the base max size now for the AUG assault rifles are 42 rounds in the magazine, and that goes for the assault rifle high end and also the invisible hand, which is the name version of the weapon. Now, speaking of the invisible hand, which is the name version of the AUG, right, it did get a buff to the talent itself. So the perfect Allegro, now it gives you 22% rate of fire increase to this weapon. So now the weapon will have, actually the invisible hand will have 830 RPM. So still in the AUG variants, let's talk about the exotic version of it, which is the Bighorn. As I said, it got a damage buff, which I don't see in the patch notes. The RPM still is the same, which is 800 RPM. The max size is still the same, which is 42 rounds in the magazine. And the optimal range, though, did got a slight buff, which is from 37 meters to 40 meters on the optimal range, which is great because the Bighorn also, it is a rifle, not only an assault rifle. Now, going down for the talent of this weapon, also it got a nice buff, and this weapon was strong as it is, and now it's even stronger with this talent, right? So headshots grant 6% headshot damage, and before it used to be 4% headshot damage. So the stack still the same, which is 25 times. So now instead of having 100% headshot damage once you have the max stacks, you're gonna have 150% headshot damage once you have the max stacks. And also, let's talk about the mods of the Bighorn. Also got a buff. So buff to the damage, buff to the talent, buff to the mods. This weapon got a huge buff overall. So the mods now basically just add a plus 10% to everything. It's just overall even better. It was a good weapon before. The problem with the Bighorn is the mag size though. Only 42 rounds in the magazine is the problem of this weapon. But if you can go past that, this weapon is amazing. Moving on for the next weapon, let's talk about the Carbine 7. This is basically like fan favorite weapon, and also it's gonna get a new name version. So everything that this regular version is gonna get, the name version also is gonna get for the damage buffs, which the damage buff of the Carbine 7 is gonna be from 47,000 damage per bullet to 49,000 damage per bullet. The RPM still the same, the mag size still the same, and there is a slight reload speed buffs and a optimal range nerf from 35 meters to 28 meters. So moving on, let's talk about the F2000s. Now the F2000s, they got buffs and few nerfs, but overall, the long story short, the F2000 is going to be one of the best weapons high end in the next update also, even especially the shield Splinterer, which we're going to be talking about in just a minute. So starting off with the F2000, they did get a damage buff, so from 45,000 damage per bullet to 49,000 damage per bullet. Now the RPM got a nerf. It went down from 900 RPM to 850 RPM, and the mag size went down again. It used to be 30, way past, and they got a buff to 40 rounds on the magazine. And then now on title update 22, it is gonna go down again to 30 rounds on the magazine. The reload time got a nerf, and then the optimal range got a buff. Now that's the F2000 high end, and also we all know that there is a named version which is called the shield Splinterer. Now this weapon not only got all of these buffs from the regular F2000, it also got a buff to the perfect Optimist. Now Optimist has been always a great weapon damage talent, so the perfect Optimist weapon damage is increased by 4.5% for every 10% ammo missing from the magazine. Used to be just 4%, and now it's 4.5%. And the regular Optimist used to be 3%, and now it's going to be 3.5% for the title update 22. Next thing is, let's talk about the fall. So the fall is interesting because the fall got for the first time a exotic version, which we're going to be talking about in just a second. But the fall though, they got a damage nerf. So they used to be 59,000 damage per bullet, now they're going to be 57,000 damage per bullet. The RPM though got a buff from 650 RPM to 700 RPM overall. The reload time got a buff, and the optimal range got a buff. Now it's 35 meters for the optimal range. And now let's talk about the exotic version, which is called the Strega. The Strega is going to be the next exotic assault rifle coming in the Division 2 title update 22, and it's looking great. It's looking promising. The thing is, one is the fall, which is, you know, a great weapon. I like it. And two, the damage of the talent, it sounds great, but still gotta try it a little bit more and to decide. But it sounds good though. So for the mods, it has 5% crit hit damage on the optic, 20 rounds on the magazine, 10% weapon handling for the grip, and then the muzzle 5% crit hit chance. So the mods are kind of meh compared to the mods of, for example, the St. Elmo's engine and the Eagle Bearer. But you know, they are okay. The Famas got a damage buff. It went from 44,000 damage per bullet to 45,000 damage per bullet. The RPM still the same, magazine size still the same, and they got some nerfs to the reload time and the optimal range. The G36 got a damage buff, actually a good damage buff. It went from 48,000 damage per bullet to 52,000 damage per bullet. But the RPM though got a nerf from 800 RPM to 750 RPM. The max size still the same, the reload time got a nerf, and then the optimal range got a buff to 35 meters for the optimal range. Next weapon in the list is the Honey Badger, and this one is interesting because this is the weapon that got the best buffs. It got two buffs that are important, the RPM and the damage itself. So the Honey Badger actually is going to be one of the best DPS if these changes go to live. It's going to be one of the best DPS on paper for next update. So the Honey Badger damage went from 47,000 damage per bullet to 51,000 damage per bullet, And also the RPM got a slight buff from 790 RPM to 800 RPM. Those two buffs right there will increase the DPS overall of this weapon quite substantial, and it's going to be great for next update. Now, the max size, reload time, and optimal range, they all got a nerf. Especially the optimal range went down from 35 meters to 28 meters, which is quite bad, but you know, it is what it is. The M4s overall got a great buffs, and that's going to be for the damage and the reload time. So they went from 44,000 damage per bullet to 46,000 damage per bullet. The RPM still the same, max size still the same, and there is a slight reload time buff to this weapon also. The optimal range got a nerf from 35 to 31 meters for the optimal range, but still is great as long as over 30 meters. I think the assault rifles they have a good optimal range. So as we know, the exotic version of the M4, the famous San Elmo's engine. So as you guys can see, the damage is the same as the police M4 because they are the same weapon type or just different variants. This is the exotic variant. So 46,000 damage per bullet, RPM still the same, 850. Now the max size got a nerf. Not the max size, the mod, but the weapon itself got a minus 10 rounds on the magazine removed from it. So now the max is 60 rounds in the magazine, and used to be that 70 rounds, which was amazing for the sustained DPS, and now it's not 70 no more. So 60 rounds in the magazine, same as the Eagle barrel. So it's kind of sad, but it is what it is. Now, another thing that got a nerf to this weapon is gonna be the mods. Probably was the best part of this weapon, and I used to say that before. The mods on this weapon was insane, and well, they all got a nerf. So now the optics will give you 15% crit hit damage. The magazine still give you plus 20 rounds, and then the underbarrel gives you 10% weapon handle. It used to be 20, and that 20 was amazing because that 20% was making this weapon a laser beam because it was more accurate and more stable. But I'm thinking it's still gonna be about the same, but it was even better. And last but not least, the muzzle gives you 15% critical hit chance. Now the mods overall still great, it's just they used to be even better. So that's the San Elmo's engine. For the people that think this weapon is trash now, like, come on, be real, it's not trash, it just got a slight nerf to the mods, but it got a buff to the damage itself, so it kind of almost balances out. The bad thing about it is the max size, and now instead of 70 rounds is 60 rounds. So the San Elmo's engine is still gonna be great. It's just, you know, it's not as good as it used to be before. Like, just a slight nerf overall, in my opinion. The PDR assault rifles, all of the variants got a damage buff, and this is gonna go also for the exotic version, which is gonna be the capacitor. So now the PDR has, instead of 56,000 damage per bullet, it's gonna have 57,000 damage per bullet. RPM 700, magazine size still the same, a slight nerf to the reload time, and a slight buff to the optimal range, which now is 31 meters for the optimal range. So again, the PDR has a named version, which is the test subject. Now the talent seems to be about the same, nothing changed for it. And then we have the exotic version of the PDR, which is the capacitor. So again, this is another thing that I did not see in the patch notes, which is the exotic capacitor got a damage buff because it's a PDR, but it's not showing on the PTS patch notes. If you do not know that it's a PDR, you wouldn't guess it got a damage buff, but it did get a damage buff. So overall, it's a little bit better, and the weapon talent seems to be the same, and the mods also seems to be the same. So same situation is going to be the P416. They got some damage nerfs, and that's going to be going to the exotic version, which is the Eagle barrel. So that's not showing on the PTS patch notes, but the Eagle barrel actually got a damage nerf. So the P416 high-end assault rifle got a slight damage nerf from 47,952 damage per bullet to 47,356 damage per bullet. So that was a slight damage nerf for the P416 high-end version, but for the Eagle Barrel actually was a huge nerf to the damage. And speaking of the Eagle Barrel, let's switch to it and let's talk about it. So as you guys can see right there, that's the damage of the Eagle Barrel, 47,000 damage per bullet, which used to be 51,000, and RPM 850. The mag size, it still is the same, 60 rounds in the magazine, and then the optimal range is 35. Now another thing that got a huge change is not the talent though, it's the mods. So the mods of this weapon got a buff to kind of almost match the St. Elmo's engine, but Eagle Barrel has a slight advantage over the St. Elmo's engine when it comes to the mods. So the mods are basically the same type of mods. The optic gives you 15% critical hit chance. The magazine gives you plus 30 rounds. The underbarrel gives you plus 10% weapon handling. And then the muzzle gives you plus 20% critical hit damage instead of the 15% critical hit damage of the St. Elmo's engine. So that's where the Eagle Barrel is a little bit higher, that 5% hit damage higher than the St. Elmo's engine on the mods itself. Next thing in line is going to be the SCAR assault rifles. Basically, the SCARs are all of the MK16s. So the MK16s, they got a damage nerf. So from 60,000 damage per bullet to 69,000 damage per bullet. They got a slight buff to the RPM from 625 to 650 RPM. So overall, they are about the same. They are great weapons, but they are not in the competition for the best assault rifles. Next assault rifle is the SIG, which is the one that has the named version, the mechanical animal. So the SIG, they did get a damage buff from 50,000 damage per bullet to 55,000 damage per bullet, but the RPM went down from 720 to 700 RPM. Overall, the SIG hasn't been the best weapons overall. The mechanical animal, though, it is a great weapon for skill builds. If you want to take advantage of that future perfection, it's a great talent though, but overall, if you want to use this weapon just for DPS, yeah, it's not that great. So next thing in line that I'm very excited to see, it's the CTAR-21. The damage that it got buff, it's gonna be enough to make it one of the best DPS assault rifle for next update. And the damage buff went from 41,000 damage per bullet to 44,000 damage per bullet though. The RPM still the same, 900 RPM, and there is some magazine nerf. So it used to be 40 rounds in the magazine, now it's down to 30 rounds on the magazine. So unfortunately, but it's still going to be a great weapon for the next update. Last but not least, we have the TKB-8 or the Kingbreaker. They're both the same weapon. The Kingbreaker is the named version that has the perfect talent, perfect flatline. Now, just the Kingbreaker and the TKB, they got a damage buff from 58,000 damage per bullet to 63,000 damage per bullet. The RPM got a nerf from 650 RPM to 600 RPM. And but the thing is, this weapon, if you're not using the Kingbreaker, there is no need to use the TKB, I feel like, just because the weapon is not that great overall when it comes to the DPS. So those are the changes for the different weapons, and now let's talk about everyone's favorite thing, the spreadsheet. So how does this look in paper, right? So well, this is it right here. These are the weapons, assault rifles itself. On the left, I'm gonna have the title update 21 weapons, and then on the right, I'm gonna have the title update 22 weapons and all of the stats. For example, right here you can see the Carbine. Now the Carbine has an extra weapon, which is the drill, which is the named version of it, and the Fall has an extra weapon, which is gonna be the Strega, the new exotic version of the Fall. So moving for this next part right here, I have everything organized by the burst DPS. So from the left and the right, I have the burst DPS. So on the right, as you guys can see, there is quite a few changes. If you want to pause the video, there is quite a few changes on the list of what's going to be the best DPS. Now, keep in mind, all of these is the base damage of the weapon, not counting the damage talent, not counting the builds, just the base, the paper DPS of these weapons, which is quite important, by the way. The only weapon in here that's been affected by the talent itself because it increased the RPM is the invisible hand. So the invisible hand right here shows the best one when it comes to the burst DPS, because that RPM is increased, is such a high RPM increase that puts it at top. But if you don't count that weapon talent of the invisible hand, look at the AUG, which is like 36th place. This is right here. That's where the invisible hand will be if you don't count that weapon talent, which increased that RPM. Just keep that in mind. I wanted to explain that. The St. Elmo's engine got a slight buff. You can see on the chart it went up. The Eagle Bearer went down though on the list because of that weapon damage nerf that it got from the P416 though. The Strega on paper looks to be great, but that max size is what's gonna kill it because of only 44 rounds in the magazine. The Bighorn is still up there, one of the best. Not only it has one of the best base DPS for the burst DPS, it's gonna be insane once that weapon talent kicks in because that talent gives you so much headshot damage. So the Bighorn, don't sleep on it, it's gonna be amazing. Last but not least, if we organize this by the sustained DPS, which is the blue numbers, this is what this chart looks like. Basically, all of the exotics are all on top, basically, besides the capacitor. They're all on top for sustained DPS. Bighorn for how much damage it has, St. Elmo's and Eagle Barrel for the max size, and Strega basically just for the straight DPS that it has. So overall, that's the sustained DPS of it. They still about the same, did not change much, but that's about it. So that's the list for it. Let me know what you guys think. All of these changes, which one is gonna be your new favorite weapon? I mean, it's still early to say, but which one is your favorite weapon right now, and which one you think is gonna be your next weapon for Title Blade 22? Let me know all of that in the comment section below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoy, a like on it would be super appreciated, and I'll catch you guys on the next video. Take care, everybody.